Welcome back. Well, in an age when the righteous left indulge in national self-flagellation, where they wish to celebrate every culture except their own, where they try to pull down statues of heroic colonial figures and try to pretend our past is evil, we wanted to shed some light on the untold story of the slave trade. A new book by historian Justin Morozzi details the extent of the North African slave trade, which in total took 1 million white European slaves, many of whom were kidnapped on the south coast of these islands. And while the UK abolished slavery in the early 19th century, the first country to do so, this hidden slave trade continued well into the 20th century. Well, I'm joined now by the historian Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Rafe, thank you very much for coming in. This is really interesting, isn't it? Because the Ottoman Empire, the great empire run from Constantinople after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, was a slave empire. The people who served the Ottoman Sultan were slaves, and many of them were eunuchs as well.
Yes, the Arabic and the Muslim slave trade, because slavery in what is today the Muslim world long predates Islam, but it is the world's second oldest and second most prolific slave trading force after Africa. Africa's had slavery for thousands of years and still carries on today, as it does actually also in the Muslim world today. But, you know, the core period we're talking about, millions of slaves in total were sent to the Arab world, and lots of them came in through the slave ports of the Barbary coast. And by the Barbary coast, we're talking about the region covered by the modern-day states of Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and Libya. And the white slave trade, which is what the Barbary slave trade we're talking about was around 350 to 400 years, which is longer than the British Empire slave trade lasted. And they seized at least 1 million white Europeans by seizing ships that had European crew, but also by raids on towns and villages across the coast of Europe. Obviously the Mediterranean, modern-day Greece and Italy, but also Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Scotland, England, Denmark. They went as far north as Iceland and as far east as the Slavs. And of course, the name for Slavs means slave, and that's because the Slavs, by different Arab trade, Muslim trade, slave traders, went to Spain in the 9th century. But the Barbary slave trade we're talking about was essentially from the 1500s to around, you could say, the early 1800s officially, but unofficially, of course, it carried on long after. And of course, you know, they had a foothold on English soil. Many people may not be aware that the island of Lundy, which is in the Bristol Channel, had the Moroccan slave flag flying above it for years. And it's from there that they would mount these slave raids across the southwest into Dorset, Cornwall, Devon, Gloucestershire, your beloved Somerset even fell prey to them. The slaves were transferred to the Lundy Islands, and from Lundy they went to Algiers, which is one of the largest slave markets, and from there they went into the Muslim world. And of course, there are many black politicians in this country and in America who descend from slaves, but I'm not sure many people may be aware that Boris Johnson's great-great-great-grandmother was a white slave from the West, from the white slave trade. She was a Circassian, which are a group of people that came from the northern Black Sea up to the Caucasus, which of course is where we have Caucasian from, and his father Stanley has written about this, and they think that's where their famous blonde hair comes from.
And his ancestor was actually bought in the slave market by another of his ancestors.
By another of his ancestors,
yes,
and that's where the Turkish connection comes in.
And so the question is, should we therefore look at the people who are involved with this and their descendants and say, we want reparations? Should we go to Turkey and say, look, we would like some reparations for all of this, for the people taken from Somerset? Or should we say, this was history, this is what happened, that all nations have barbarous parts of their past, and that's just the way it is? Because it seems to me the whole reparations argument is very, very one-sided. The only people who basically should ever pay reparations are the UK, not Turkey, and that seems to me to be absurd.
Yes, well, sensible viewers of GB News, and all GB News viewers are sensible, would say, of course not. That's in the long distant past. The sins of the father mustn't be meted out onto the son. And of course, out of a population of millions, there were only a few thousand slave owners in this country. The vast majority of Britons descend from people who lived lives akin to serfdom. Why on earth should their descendants be forced to pay taxes for this sort of thing out of their tax money? But of course, what's most interesting is that the far left never make those arguments, and they never think about not only, of course, the Arab slave trade, but there were more Africans held in bondage by other Africans than were ever transported across the ocean. There were brutal human sacrifice rituals that killed thousands of African slaves every year in the kingdoms of Benin and Dahomey in West Africa. That's never spoken about. Also never spoken about is the issue of modern-day slavery, where there are 7 in every 1,000 Africans today is a slave, according to the International Labour Organization. That's about 10 million people. That's never spoken about. The kings who are the descendants of the kings who enslaved Africans are still on the thrones in places like the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana. No call for reparations there. Instead, what we have, for example, is the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who has erected the Khan turnip in London as a slave memorial, and he wants to have another 5 of these memorials across the British Empire slave trading route. So he's gone on a jolly to Ghana to announce the first of these monuments will be in Accra, another in Ghana. Now, why not also have monuments to the African slave trade and what the Africans, or indeed what the Muslims are doing to white Europeans and white British people? Why is there no slave memorial in Dorset or in Lundy or in fact in Somerset?
Or why don't we go to the Victoria Tower Gardens and look at the Buxton Memorial to the abolition of the slave trade and slavery in the British Empire in 1833, came into effect in 1834, and the Ottoman Empire stopped slave trading because it was defeated in the First World War. And who was it defeated by? It was defeated by us. And if you look at what the Royal Navy was doing in the late 19th century, it is stopping slavery. So the ending of slavery is something of which we can be immeasurably proud, and the responsibility for slaving is something that happened in every society until relatively modern times.
That's right. That's the critical point. Slavery was universal. To match the beautiful Buxton Memorial, which is currently under renovation in Victoria Gardens, there needs to be a West Africa Squadron memorial. The West Africa Squadron was the British Royal Navy squadron that tried to enforce an end to the slave trade. We expended a sum equivalent to 2% of our GDP. That's a sum equivalent to our modern defence budget. That was the first time in human history, I think, where a nation deliberately made itself poorer in order to advance a moral good. And that's what's unique about the Protestant ethic that went through this country, the evangelical movement, which really saw all humans as being equal. That was unparalleled outside of Western Europe.
And even the less actively evangelical politicians, so Palmerston risks our relations with both Portugal and indeed with the United States because he believes that stopping the slave trade is so important. And he's not. His son-in-law's very evangelical, but Palmerston wasn't really particularly interested in religion. It was a fundamental driving force of British politics in the 19th century. Prince Albert's first speech
1840.
Is made about stopping slavery, and it's rather brave because he is making it to all the great and the good of London in what is not his own language, and is going for a controversial, brave issue. So the drive, the moral drive to stop slavery is essentially a very British activity.
Very British, not uniquely British, but extremely British and unparalleled prior to that point. And as I said, that apology was made in 1840 very powerfully by the Prince Consort. That's why there's no need for any member of the current royal family to make any apology on this point. And it has to be said, the first half of the British Empire, you can quite rightly criticise for many, many terrible things that happened, and also in the second half. But the second half of the British Empire was really about atoning for the sins of the first half to a great extent. And as awful as slavery was, no one can deny that the benefits of colonialism we can still see today in parliamentary democracy, in the rule of law, common law, the judiciary, the police, the army, hospitals, medicine, universities, schools, the list goes on. That was the legacy of the British Empire. Remember, Britain was only in Africa from really the 1880s. If you look at the scramble for Africa until the 1980s, only for 100 years or so. And that, the majority of that, you could say, had left a very great legacy behind there. But the other point I want to make is Sadiq Khan is always telling us he's the son of a Pakistani bus driver. Pakistan is the global centre of slavery today. He went on an official state visit and he never mentioned slavery once.
As we finish this section to strains of Flanders and Swan, the English are best, I say thank you very much to Rafe. And finally,